Welcome to Dave and Dom Demystify, a FinTech Futures podcast, helping make sense of the world of FinTech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystify.
Welcome to the show, everybody. And today we have another guest from Moody's, Marie Diron from Moody's Rating. So welcome, Marie. It's brilliant to have you with us. You've just done some phenomenal research. We're going to get into that. But I wondered if you could just start by introducing yourself and telling us a bit about what you do.
Thank you very much for having me. So yes, Marie Diron, I'm the global head of sovereign ratings at Moody's. And that means that together with a fantastic team, we are responsible for ratings of governments at the national level, at the regional, local level, and public sector entities in general. And so for our really rating analysis, it's important that we look ahead and we look at the big trends that are likely to shape government's ability to repay their debt. And that's where the work that we're going to go into some depth in the exchange here comes in. We're really aware of these big trends around AI, and we were interested to really dig into this quite a bit deeper.
It's fascinating because we've actually talked to some of your colleagues from Moody's before, and that was one of the things that we were actually thinking about when we were kind of discussing with them, is the impact that AI and the adoption of AI will have at a kind of sovereign level. So I'm really delighted that we're having this conversation, because I think it's something that is really worth people fully understanding, that this is going to have a massive impact, not just to companies and individuals, but to countries as well. So you've just done some in-depth research, and I just wondered if you could kind of highlight what that research was trying to look at, and I guess some of the high-level summary findings that you got.
Yeah, very good. I mean, the reason why we wanted to take that topic is that, as you've said, we're all aware of really the transformative power of AI. Many of us have seen really quite striking examples of individuals, companies, governments using AI. But at this stage, so far, at least, we didn't have really a systematic framework to assess really what are going to be the positive and also the negative effects on AI on kind of three really key aspects that are important in our sovereign analysis. It's the impact on productivity, on how much people produce in their day-to-day work, the impact on social conditions, social risks, and the impact on public finances. So through this research effort, we really look at this on a broad basis, but again, kind of really grounding our analysis on evidence and on key assumptions.
Fantastic. And you found some amazing insights, I think. I mean, I guess your research suggests that there is going to be a big productivity gain potential from AI. But on the other side, you've kind of got sort of social strains. So, even with those sort of three lenses, you can kind of see a kind of conflict. I mean, from your perspective, do you think AI is going to be just that economic miracle, or is it going to be a political strain, do you think?
Well, let's take that, because I think the key conclusions is that it's very nuanced and different groups will experience maybe more of the positive effects and other groups will experience more of the negative effects. Maybe if we start with that productivity, so how much people produce on a given day at work. As you said, we find that for really most, if not all countries in the world, AI is likely to lead to an increase in productivity. And we find an average, an increase in productivity by 1.5%. It might be helpful to kind of bring that to our experience. If you and I work around 220 days per year, that's the kind of average, 10 hours a day, then 1.5% gain means productivity gain means that at the end of the year, we've produced 3 more days worth of our work. Cumulate that over 5 years, it's 3 weeks, 15 days, 3 weeks. So it is substantial. Some of these productivity gains are thanks to what we call augmentation, and what economists in general have come to call augmentation, which means that thanks to AI, we can do more. There are tasks that maybe would have just not been feasible before that we can now go and do. We save time, so we can kind of do more in a given day. Some of that, though, is through displacement, which means that in some cases, it will be more viable for a company to have an AI tool, machine, let's say, carry out some tasks rather than a human. And so some people will see reduced work or maybe displaced, laid off. So that productivity gain, 1.5%, comes already with kind of these two facets of empowerment, if you want, enablement of more, but also some displacement there. And that's where really these social implications come through. It's really different groups being affected differently, being differently exposed to the augmentation versus the displacement that will have social implications.
Fantastic. And we're going to dive into a lot more detail around that. You talk in your report, and I'm sorry, this is a really dumb question, about AI diffusion. I sort of was like, maybe that's a term I should know, but I didn't quite understand what you meant. I just wondered if you could sort of explain that as well.
No, you're absolutely right to ask about this, because it is an important aspect. By AI diffusion, what we mean is really the adoption of AI. And use that term diffusion because this technology, as we know, is used by really a wide range of people in a wide range of tasks. And that's a bit of a contrast with previous technological advancements that were maybe more niche, addressed to more kind of specific roles there in particular sectors. Here we're talking about a very kind of widely available technology that can be applied in many different ways. So now different countries will see greater or lesser adoption or diffusion. And that's in part related to skills, to the ability of workers to kind of really train themselves into these new technologies. It's related to things like infrastructure. And you need to use AI, you need to have really good tech infrastructure around broadband and so on. So we'll see differences there. But again, compared to previous technological advancements, we expect that diffusion will be a lot more widespread. And I think we're seeing that already in some cases.
I really, really like the term, actually, because it sort of speaks to, as you say, the fact that the impact of AI is so broad across an economy and the way people work and how things are done. It's really worth sort of adopting, because it really, it just totally speaks to the fact that this isn't about a sort of narrow change. This is a total kind of almost cultural change in many ways, isn't it?
Yeah, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, has done some really interesting work looking at really profession by profession. What is the exposure, the kind of to which extent would people in these roles use AI or maybe in the future be replaced by AI? And it's really interesting because you see really that breadth. At the really high end of that exposure, you have professions like lawyers, but also radiologists, a lot in medicine, healthcare, a lot in creative industries, a lot in economists for some of us there. So really, you see that very widespread of roles where AI can be used, can be adopted. And again, with really two different aspects, the one that enables you to do more in your day job and the ones where maybe AI is replacing at least someone's time.
I mean, you talk just sort of going into job replacement. I think the report suggests, like as you're alluding to, that that's going to be quite uneven. And still, there's a lot of uncertainty around that. What are the sorts of jobs that you think are the most exposed, particularly over the next few years?
I think at this stage, what we can say is the type of tasks, more than really kind of specific jobs, specific sectors, is the tasks that are repeatable, that can be standardized, and hence can be really carried out by an AI application more easily. And in practice, what it means is that these tasks tend to be around the middle level of skills. So if previous kind of technological advancements have touched particularly the low skill jobs, now we're kind of moving up the skill level. Jobs that involve clerical, administrative tasks are really where there's likely to be most diffusion of AI.
It's interesting because, again, from a sort of societal impact, what happened in terms of automation, I guess, at sort of the manufacturing level had big impact on, I guess, blue-collar workers. You're now talking about that impact on sort of white collar workers. I mean, are you sort of seeing impacts to things like the middle class? So as these sort of AI comes into the workplace and affects these jobs, is it sort of impacting society at that level as well?
So it is impacting society across a broader range of really kind of tranches, if you want, or swath of the population, because it is this mid-level in terms of skills. Yes, they are kind of in social terms, typically people who would be in this middle class part of the population. Now, I think so far, there's really very little concrete evidence of. People often kind of think about this as a negative, as well, that means that the middle class is going to suffer really very high unemployment. The evidence around that is very sparse. There are anecdotes, there's kind of a few data points in particular professions, but for instance, on entry-level jobs, which is something that has attracted headlines, it is at this stage not clear if the slowdown in the level of entry-level jobs is really linked to AI or if it's linked to more broadly the economic cycle. So I think we need to see that kind of cycle come through. And to come back to your question on the middle class, I think the good news there is that typically people at a mid-level of jobs also have training and have capacity to adjust to find other occupations, maybe more than lower skill people. So we're likely to see that transition really in the next few years. I think it's happening in a lot of countries really right now in the next few years, with some jobs being reconsidered, reshaped by AI, some people kind of being led to find new occupations. And that's where kind of all the schemes around retraining, finding kind of new occupations will come in and will be very important.
I think it's something that people don't really think about when they're kind of reading the headlines of sort of jobs kind of disappearing because of AI, is the fact that actually there's going to be a need for new jobs. So there's going to be job transformations which happen. I was kind of interested from the work that you do, will you sort of track all of these changes as so you've done this piece of research. Does that then turn into something that you're kind of looking at on an ongoing basis when you're thinking about these sovereign ratings and what kind of goes into it?
Very good question. And yes, indeed. So we did this research to really give ourselves and communicate to financial markets. Really, this is the framework of analysis that we find. This is really based on certain key assumptions, the conclusions we can draw at this stage. So for instance, that 1.5% average productivity gain, what will determine the social implications, what will determine the implications for public finance. We have that for really quite a large number of countries, for more than 100 countries. So now we know what to look for, if you want. As the data come in, we are able to use that lens, that analytical framework that we've set, to really interpret the data better. We're also using that in our interactions with governments. We meet governments in the course of our work. That's very important to then understand from them, well, how are they seeing this transformation through AI? Are they resetting or maybe upgrading their training programs, their support programs for various parts of the population? So this is all very useful for us to understand. Now that we have that common framework that we apply across countries, we can look really at the evidence as it comes in.
I mean, it's an amazing thing. I mean, and I guess what's great about the report is, okay, I guess your target audience is the governments and financial markets, but it's also very good for just all of us to understand in terms of what's going on. And I think it's interesting because you talk about in the report some of the inequalities that you're beginning to see or you can sort of observe may happen. And that's at education levels and genders and income groups. And it varies across geographies as well, which I sort of found fascinating. One of the things that you highlight, which sort of struck me, was women may be more exposed to what's going on than men. And I just wondered if you could talk a bit about that. Because again, I can imagine if I'm a government and I'm sort of looking at this report and then thinking about that may then feed into sort of some of the things that you would do structurally to kind of support women going forward. So I'm just interested to kind of get your perspective.
So we do indeed draw that finding that women are likely to be more exposed, in particular to the displacement of jobs, so the replacement of people with AI applications. It comes to what we were talking about earlier, the occupations that are more likely to really see wide AI diffusion. So that women tend to be maybe over or really quite represented in clerical administrative jobs. Now, this is a general finding, kind of a global finding. When you look at the country level, it's really interesting because you get a lot of color from that and very varied color. So there are a number of countries in Asia in particular with a high proportion of female STEM graduates. These females are very well placed to take advantage of AI, to really position themselves into the jobs of the future. So we will see these big differences. What is, to your point, for governments then, it's important that they understand these different impacts, and so they can think about how to deploy public resources to really address these varied effects.
I mean, I think that's so interesting because here in the UK, I think the UK suffers from the fact that not enough women are sort of encouraged to go into STEM through the sort of education process. I mean, my daughter did a maths A-level and she was the only female in a sort of sea of men at the end, to be honest with you. And I think, as you say, from a kind of government point of view, things like this become more urgent, don't they, to solve? Because if AI is going to start hollowing out some of these more clerical things, then the impact could be really, really, I don't want to use badly, but it could be very profound, couldn't it?
That's one challenge for governments is really the speed of change. So where government policies operates with certain timeframes, if you think about education policy, nearly by definition, it really has, you invest today to see the benefits of that investment as a country years down the line. And here we have this technological transformation that is happening at much faster speed. So that really poses a challenge to policymakers. How do they adjust their policies, their programs in a way that matches really the speed of transformation across the economy? And again, we see very different countries responding differently. Some countries are more able to reorient kind of programs, maybe on a faster basis. Others tend to be a bit slower, and then there might be, in that transition period, then the negative impacts of AI might dominate before hopefully later the positive effects start to come through.
I mean, I find it just at a personal level, keeping track of what's going on almost impossible. So I do feel for the policymakers out there who they're sort of got the bureaucratic processes that they tend to need to go through. And I just wondered from an observational point of view, do you almost feel like the AI kind of transformation is happening too quickly in many ways, or?
It's happening. I don't know if it's too quickly, or for us, we're looking at this as a factual statement. It's happening at a certain speed, and speed has positive effects because this really starts to open up opportunities for a lot of companies and individuals across the country in new ways. Now, governments are using AI themselves, and that's also interesting to watch. And we're watching that, how governments can onboard AI to really inform their decisions. It might be, for instance, about looking at the effectiveness of certain subsidies or programs. With AI, you can be you have a lot more information, and these decisions can be taken a lot more robustly. So that is an important side. On the revenue side, for governments, when they collect taxes, again, AI is a powerful tool to really sharpen that tax collection, make it more effective. And we're seeing that in different countries. Some countries are already quite advanced with really onboarding AI into public administration. Others are maybe kind of coming at it more gradually.
Just taking that point on, you in the report talk about advanced economies seeing bigger productivity gains. Is that because they're adopting AI faster? I just wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
You're right. When we look at these 100 plus countries, we tend to see that 1.5% average productivity gains is more 2% or so for advanced economies and a low 1% for emerging markets. It's due to a range of factors. One is that there are different types of jobs in these different countries. In advanced economies, you will find more of the jobs that can be augmented with AI, that can be really empowered with AI. So that is one aspect. The other aspect is related to, again, skills, training. There tends to be more of that available in advanced economies than in emerging markets. And that's not true across the board. There are emerging markets that have really very effective education programs. And the final set of factors is really infrastructure. So broadband, Wi-Fi is not yet universally available in all emerging markets in the way that it is in advanced economies. So if you don't have that really basic infrastructure, then developing AI applications or onboarding AI for an average company is not going to be possible. So that's why we tend to see that rank ordering. Now, for emerging markets, this also means that, if anything, there's potentially more of an opportunity to gain. So governments there can play a different role. They can be more at the kind of infrastructure provision level to then allow the private sector to onboard, adopt AI. And some emerging markets are really moving in that direction. But generally speaking, we're expecting that there will be slightly slower adoption and uptake in emerging markets than advanced economies.
Again, thinking about sort of different countries, are you seeing, or have you factored in the sort of policies around AI that different countries might have in terms of this adoption? So, I guess the US is a bit more sort of open to what's going on. Europe's slightly more kind of guarded in terms of policies. So I just wondered if that had been factored into the research as well.
So at this stage, not directly, because it's difficult to, you're right, there's different levels of regulation, for instance, around AI between US and Europe. That is probably behind, in part, the different speeds of really AI providers in these two regions. But the kind of macroeconomic effects that we're talking about are going to come not only from the provision of AI, but really the adoption of AI. And so there, it's not so clear that there are so many differences. One factor that will come into play, and we're not able to quantify that, but is we're going back to social considerations. In different countries, there's likely to be different degrees of maybe social resistance to AI. So if we're looking at an environment where jobs across a wide range of occupations are really transformed, are redefined, in some countries, the population will really get on board with that relatively quickly. In other countries, there might be more resistance, which governments will respond to. They will manage in a way that they think is appropriate. So that is also going to determine the speed of diffusion.
Very interesting. One of the things that I was fascinated by was the thought from you that countries with aging populations may see some of the biggest benefits from AI. I just wondered if you sort of see that AI may be a solution to the demographic crisis at all. For me, that really stood out as something very interesting.
So we know, and aging is unfortunately a very predictable trend. We know that countries in Europe in general, in high-income Asia, Japan, Korea, and a few others, the population is aging really at quite a significant pace. And that means that the population of working age, able to work, is in some cases already shrinking. In others, it's growing less fast. And AI offers the possibility to fill roles that would have been previously taken by humans by AI applications. And so offers the possibility for companies to really mitigate that effect of one consequence of population aging is that it's harder to find employees, to find workers. So there's probably some positive effects to come there. It will be really incumbent on the companies and the countries in general to enable then the workers who are there to onboard AI. And so one question is whether if the workforce is getting older, is that a workforce that is able to retrain itself to rethink the way they work, to use AI. But yes, in principle at least, and I think we're seeing some examples of that, probably more in Asia, that is maybe more advanced in that aging process. There's kind of more flexibility, if you want, to think for a company to think about resources in general. There's the human resources as well as the AI, kind of AI-based resources.
I guess related to that, and as societies, you get adoption of AI, potentially the workforce changes, like countries are going to see impacts on potentially tax revenues as well. So, if you've got potentially less people doing certain jobs, you might see tax revenues drop. So you sort of talk a bit about kind of the AI tax debate. Is that something that you think is an important consideration for governments to be really sort of thinking about now? Is like, how are they going to raise taxes in the future? Yeah, I was just keen to get your views.
This is a really, really interesting question. So yes, AI is going to have an impact on taxes in different ways. One is, we talked about 1.5% increase in productivity. We don't know yet, but that these kind of productivity gains will be used in different ways. One is that, companies might become more profitable. That should be good for ministries of finance. They will get more corporate income tax from these companies. Another way is that wages should rise. In economics, kind of through cycles, what we've seen is that when productivity rises, then wages adjust. So again, the population that are benefiting from still employed and being more productive should have higher incomes, and that will translate into higher taxes. There's the negative side of that, which you mentioned, is that, as we discussed, some people will lose their job, will be displaced as a result of AI. And so that is having kind of a negative impact on the tax base, and especially so if these people are unable to find a new job relatively quickly. But other aspects in which AI will affect the revenue is, one is that AI will create new functions, new jobs, new companies, new activities. And so governments will look at how are they able to kind of levy taxes on these or not. I think we saw that with the kind of online transition, where for some time, at least, it was quite difficult for governments to tax kind of online transactions, online purchases. So there will be that question as well. Are governments really preserving their tax base through the transformation of economic activity? And then the last point is there is more on the efficiency of the tax administration. As we discussed, in any country, there is a gap between the tax that the government should, in principle, on paper receive and what we receive in practice. And then how there's some costs in the tax administration. And AI can both enable to close that gap and reduce the cost of tax administration. So quite a few things happening there to reshape the way, kind of the relationship between AI and government revenue.
I mean, it is startling, actually. It's one of the things I think that AI, one of its impacts is it creates, in principle, a lot more transparency. So there's less places to hide because you have software which is basically doing analysis that people would have done before, and it's much easier to kind of get to what's going on. So it's a really well-made point, I think, with all of this, is that the sort of efficiency gains that AI can bring are not just at a company level, they can be at a country level. So as you say, sort of increasing the efficiency of the whole tax regime, is a huge thing, isn't it?
Yes, the efficiency of the tax regime, of the administration in general, in countries like European countries, because really the administration has developed over decades, if not centuries. Governments currently have really dozens, if not hundreds, of different schemes that are not often kind of well connected. If AI can connect these various data sets, then that allows a government to be much more targeted and much more efficient in provision of subsidies, for instance. Also being able to collect taxes more efficiently. We're seeing some governments already doing some work on that, really taking different data sets and to provide a pre-filled tax return, for instance. That's one way in which some governments are looking at using AI.
And I mean, again, you may not be comfortable answering this, but when you're thinking about the ratings on a country, are these the things and the approaches that governments take that you will be starting to think about in terms of the ratings that you will give?
It's exactly the things that we're thinking about, because I think, as we discussed in the course of our exchange today, AI is having and going to have a significant impact on the economy, on social conditions, on public finances. All of that is really what really forms the basis of our sovereign ratings. So we are looking at really the ability of countries to maximize the gains, if you want, and we mitigate the costs, negative effects of AI. And over time, that could well kind of lead to changes in credit profiles, because really the gains are maximized in some cases and maybe other countries tend to suffer more of the loss or the cost.
It's a very profound thing, actually, when you think about it. And I was just wondering, from your perspective, when historians look back on this moment in time, will they talk about it as the new industrial revolution or something a bit more profound, do you think, than that?
It will be very interesting. Hopefully we'll be able to look back, and we talked earlier about how quickly things are changing. So maybe it's not too far from now that we'll be able to get the benefit of hindsight. But it does look like this is really a set of technologies that have wide-ranging impacts. They're kind of really advancing at a fast speed that may increase kind of differentiation between different groups. So all of these reasons kind of to really think that decades from now, this will mark really a point, an inflection point, at least in the way we read economic history.
No, it'd be fascinating to kind of look back, won't it? Final question from me, because when I think about AI, I'm trying to keep up with the technology, and I guess we're all trying to keep up with the technology, and that can be a challenge in itself. And I can imagine governments looking at the technology and wondering about how to kind of keep up with it. But they've also then got to think about the transition that will happen within their countries, I guess globally. We're sort of at this stage, transitional stage, I think that AI will usher in. And what are your thoughts around where the focus should be? I mean, obviously it has to be everywhere, but it's going to be quite a challenge, isn't it, to sort of focus on not just the technology, but also that transition as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's important for governments to have a clear vision of how their country population can benefit from AI over, say, the medium to long term, but be also cognizant that in the near term, in the next few years, the effects might be quite different. If that medium to long term is really quite positive, it's really still likely that in the nearer term, the effects will be a lot more mixed. So what is important is really for governments to manage that transition by identifying the population groups that are negatively exposed to AI, decide what is the appropriate form of support for these groups of population, and at the same time kind of prepare for the medium long term with kind of education, training, so on, that takes time to put in place to implement, but that will be really determinant for the future effects. So yes, it is a complex undertaking, but I think the countries where the governments, the institutions are strong, have, I think, experience of managing this kind of situations. And that's where we see really coordination within an administration between different ministries, different functions, that is important to really manage that transition.
And I guess I'm just sort of thinking about here in the UK, I mean, in many countries, the government has to report on people's access to the internet. And so the internet is seen as important as a utility in many ways. I just wonder if access to AI and use of AI might be something that governments then get kind of measured on.
It might be. I think it's really for governments to decide and really what is the use of these sort of targets. You're right that it used to be that common data were around access to electricity, water, that remains important, and then moving to access to internet, data becoming increasingly important in future. Access to AI could be. From a sovereign rating analysis, this really very specific kind of KPIs are not necessarily determinant. What we want to understand is, well, why is the government giving themselves a target as far as AI access is concerned? And what are they putting in place to achieve that target? That's really how we look at it.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I mean, that's been incredible. I'd encourage everyone to have a look at your report as well. We'll provide a link in the show notes to that report. But it was really fascinating. I mean, I think it's the first time that I've sort of sat and had a conversation with somebody who looks at things at a country level and talked about the impact of AI just generally across various countries as well. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much, Dave. I really enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Dame Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.